Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Pro Se Legal Clinics. My name is Pat Malone. I'm Associate Director at the Immigration Advocates Network. We work with partners and use technology to create new tools and find new ways to help immigrants and their advocates. I'm going to talk for a minute about logistics and then we'll hand it over to our panel. The presentation is about 1 hour long. Please submit your questions throughout. We may hold them for the end because the panelists may cover what you're hoping to hear in the interim. We sent handouts with the last reminder for today's session, and I've also linked it in a message to you. And finally, if none of that works, you can go to immigrationadvocates.org. On our homepage, scroll down to the right corner in alerts, and we've posted it on our site. So with that, I will turn it over to our moderator today. Welcome to Sukti Dittal. She's Executive Director of the Robert and Helen Bernstein Institute for Human Rights at New York University School of Law. Welcome, Sukti.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you to Ian for your partnership and for the important work that you do. And many thanks to all of you out there for joining us today for our second teach-in as part of the Justice Power series today on Pro Se clinics, as Pat mentioned. My name is Sukti, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the director of the Bernstein Institute at NYU Law School. And it's a complete honor and a total privilege to serve as the moderator for today's session, which is done in partnership with, of course, Ian and Esperanza Immigrant Rights Project and New Sanctuary Coalition. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce the topic of the panel to make sure that you all signed on for the right webinar, give a bio of the speakers and a format for today's program. So today we're going to take some time to learn how attorneys, organizers, and community members can work together to support pro se applicants for asylum and other types of immigration relief. Evelyn and Linda are going to share insights on their pro se legal clinics, which really focus on how do you center immigrants in their fight to remain, what are some tactics and strategies to mobilize and sustain volunteers, and how do you provide timely and relevant information to folks who are navigating what is increasingly becoming a more and more complicated and terrorizing system. Our panels will also reflect on the new and emerging challenges that emerge as a result of the pandemic. To take us deep into this, we have two fantastic justice warriors with us today. We'll hear from Linda Chavez. Linda is the senior clinic coordinator at New Sanctuary Coalition. She joined the organization in 2017 as a volunteer. And before too long, she was leading the accompaniment program, one of the programs at New Sanctuary, and then became the senior clinic coordinator. Her experience as a Mexican American growing up on the southern border brought her to the migrant justice space and her desire to eradicate walls and borders of any kind. Although Linda currently lives in New York, her heart still belongs to Texas, the Texas that few people know, where cultures blend and community persistently defy national boundaries. We also have Evelyn Cedeño Naik, who's the program manager for community education at Esperanza Immigrant Rights Project. Evelyn joined as a staff attorney in January 2015. She's originally from Ecuador and immigrated to the US at the age of 3. She's very interested in issues relating to race and immigration, and that's what drove her for her undergraduate studies and motivated her to attend law school. She got her JD from the University of Michigan and a BA from the University of California. One of the most formative experiences that brought, I think, Evelyn here was working as a student attorney at the Child Advocacy Law Clinic at Michigan. And since then, she's been incredibly passionate about child advocacy, and more recently around advocacy for unrepresented immigrants, which we'll hear about today. Thank you both for sharing your space with us. Next slide, please, Pat. I'm sorry I didn't give you the direction last time. So just a little bit about Justice Power. Justice Power is a network of activists and lawyers who engage in community-centered approaches, focus on building the power of immigrant communities and advancing and increasing access to justice. what we're doing here today is really uplifting the work of these organizations that are part of this network, who are thinking intentionally and deeply about how to empower folks and how to build up power for folks to know the law, to use the law, to shape the law, and ultimately to transform the laws that impact our lives. Next slide, please, Pat. The Justice Power network is rooted in this framework, what's called legal empowerment, and that is the core mission to the Bernstein Institute for Human Rights. And it's really trying to tackle the fact that there are more than 5 billion people in the world that live without access to meaningful justice. I mean, it is a staggering and significant statistic. And so when we're thinking about what are strategies to combat that, the rights-based methodology that we imbibe and we advance, and what Justice Power really roots itself in, is a methodology in which those directly impacted are at the center of their own fights for justice, and that we're creating opportunities for immigrants in this instance to understand the laws, as I said, to shape and transform them and create more dignified legal alternatives. The field is quite robust. There's over 2,300 organizations around the world that identify their work as falling within this framework, in at least 170 countries. We're really excited to be here in the US space and really uplifting the work of these fantastic organizations. The Justice Power Network launched back in 2018. We began the journey to really start documenting and make visible these different types of approaches. You'll see here, there's 9 different strategies that live on the website. They range from accompaniment to community-driven campaigning and litigation, to community paralegals or navigators, as we think about them here in the US, hotlines, and of course today, pro se legal clinics. And I just want to say one more thing before I transition it over, is that when we started in 2018, it was already a crisis. I mean, we've been dealing with immigration violence since inception, but 2018 felt incredibly heightened. Now, 2 years on, as all of you know on this call, it just keeps, it's just exponential and exacerbating. And so these strategies feel that much more important, because we need to think differently about how to address the crisis and the violence that exists. So these strategies are really rooted and anchored in the hearts and minds of those who we partner with. So on that note, I am going to pass it over to Linda, who's going to spend about 10 minutes or so talking through New Sanctuary Coalition's Pro Se Legal Clinic. That will be followed by Evelyn, who will also take us deep inside Esperanza's work. And then I will come back in and we're going to have a moderated question Q&A session for about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to open up the space to hear from all of you out there. So on that note, Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Sukti, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm going to just do a brief overview of New Sanctuary Coalition. Yeah, next slide. So the New Sanctuary Coalition, I'm going to specifically be speaking about the Pro Se Clinic today, and specifically the remote Pro Se Clinic, which began during this COVID pandemic shutdowns. Next, please. So the New Sanctuary Coalition is an organization of faith communities that believe that migration is a human right and that no one should be deported. And we stand in solidarity with affected community members that we call friends. So you'll hear me refer to friends, and these would be individuals who are being directly affected by immigration policy in the United States. Our core values are 3. The first is to do no harm. The second is respect, and the third is no judgment. And we aspire to these. We do our very, very best to impart our values to our volunteers as we bring them into the community. And of course, our friends also follow the values of, you know, as they learn from our community. Next, please. So this is how the Pro Se Clinic works. Next. So during COVID, as I said, we sought to replicate in some way the Pro Se Clinic that we had been that we had been executing every week. We were a weekly drop-in clinic, and we were in the basement of a church, and every week we saw somewhere around 100 to 150 friends, and each of those friends would be put on a team with about 3 volunteers, and so the room was huge, it was packed, and it was very loud. But we quickly realizing that this, you know, the COVID shutdown, especially being in New York, it came upon very suddenly, and it was strictly being enforced. And we knew that, we didn't know how long it was going to be, but we knew that we couldn't suspend operations. So we have very talented tech people that volunteer with us, and they helped us create this you know, virtual clinic. So we're using Zoom to do this virtual clinic. We are at the same time incorporating new friends, the friends that used to just drop in. We have a referral form, and we have, you know, folks calling our phone all the time. We have friends giving our phone numbers to their community members, and so they reach out to us that way, and then they get screened. The screening is basically a sort of a triage method, so that we can discern where on the wait list this individual will be placed. From the waiting list, they get invited to come to the virtual clinic. And this basically, we're deciding, you know, on the urgency of their case, their situation, their needs. When they come to the clinic, the virtual clinic, they are assigned onto a team, and their team consists of 3 volunteers. The teams also operate during the week in a daytime clinic, if that works best for the friend. And we have some hours during Tuesday and Thursdays when we do that. The work that we're able to do with friends, basically anything that they can do without an attorney. So this includes work permits, changes of venue, of course, asylum applications, both defensive and affirmative. We're working with them to do motions to reopen based on in absentia orders, and in some cases, more complicated things. And then finally, we're now helping to prepare friends for their individual hearings, friends who really ended up without a lawyer to represent them. Next, please. So, you know, as I was explaining, when a new friend comes to us, they are put on a waiting list. About a year ago, our waiting list was somewhere around 400. It was unwieldy. It was, you know, just required all kinds of organization and systems to put in place, and it was really quite unexpected. We're an organically grown grassroots organization. Started in it started in 2007, but when this man was elected to the White House, and immigration started becoming just more horrific than we could have ever imagined. The numbers that we saw, the numbers of folks needing our assistance just grew astronomically, and so this waiting list formed. At the time, while friends are on the waiting list, however, they receive other services. They can participate in other programs, and one of them is the accompaniment program. Supti mentioned earlier. The accompaniment program is a program by which friends are accompanied to their check-ins and hearings. They have, again, there's a team of volunteers with a leader that go with them and are just simply with them. They don't speak, they don't interact with officials or judges or anything like that, but they are literally standing with friends. So once off the waiting list, they are invited back. Currently, the remote clinic, we're seeing about 45 friends every week. We're gradually adding new friends to that pool, and we're so excited that because of the way that we've been able to organize in this time, we've actually reduced our waiting list to about 100, and it's just, yeah, it's beyond exciting. And then the volunteers come into play. Also, they help us organize by RSVPing when we send out our announcements, time to sign up for next week, and then they sort of continually they'll sign up for a new team, and then when that finishes, they'll as that reoccurs, they'll RSVP for that team, and then once they're finished, they volunteer again. Next, please. So these are the different roles that our members take when they come to our clinic. First of all, our friends. Our friends absolutely have a role. Our friends are the leader of the team. Our friends decide for themselves what course they want to take after receiving counsel from a volunteer attorney and working through the different options with their volunteer team members. On a team, we have a computer person. This is somebody who really is tech savvy and can manage all the different systems. We use Zoom, as I mentioned, and we also use Keybase, which is an encrypted end-to-end Slack kind of a message program. And then we have an interpreter. The interpreter is key to the team because the interpreter is the link between the affected community member and the volunteers, the other volunteers on the team. We really strive to employ a language justice approach to interpretation, giving our friends as much time as they need, helping them to understand every step of the way that they can ask questions, they can stop, they can start, they can, it is really putting them in the driver's seat of their work. And then finally, we have a note taker. We have found that no matter how many people are listening, also one more person listening and taking notes always helps form the best work. So that note taker is there to to listen carefully, to also engage with the interview that's happening and take the very best notes. Our attorneys, our volunteer attorneys, are both immigration and non-immigration attorneys. And these attorneys are not representing friends, and this is very, very important that everyone understand that. Most importantly, that our friends understand that when they come to us, they receive a consultation from a volunteer attorney. They will have a volunteer attorney review their documents before they're filed, but that sort of is the very limited way that they are engaging with our volunteer attorneys. They don't, we don't have the capacity. That's not how we're set up to provide representation. We do, however, have, as I said, we have non-immigration attorneys that are, they shadow our immigration attorneys for a time, and they're mentored by them, and they very quickly learn the, you know, sort of activist way that that NSC approaches immigration law. We have volunteers that also serve as leaders. You know, a program like this cannot function efficiently and well without our volunteer leaders. We have limited staff, you know, like very, very many nonprofits, and so we rely heavily on our leaders. These leaders are have risen, you know, from the ranks of the volunteer pool. They have been on teams, many teams, and they have acquired a lot of knowledge. And then finally, we have coordinators for the Pro Se Clinic. There are 3 of us. We have a volunteer coordinator who is indispensable because she does all of the staffing of all of this. And then we have a staff of social workers. These are interns who also provide assistance during the Pro Se Clinic because we found that friends have, you know, needs, right? They have needs, and being in New York, we are fortunate to be able to provide a lot of services, or you know, help them understand what services that they qualify for. I think that's all. Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Linda, thank you so much for that. We're definitely going to come back to a lot of the points that you raised, and I'm excited to do that. Okay, now I will turn it over to Evelyn. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So my name is Evelyn Cedeño Naik. I am one of the program managers at Esperanza Immigrant Rights Project, and I'll walk us through what our asylum workshops and support looks like. Next slide, please. First, just to kind of explain who we are as an organization, we are a project of the Catholic Charities of Los Angeles. We do believe that all immigrants deserve access to education and representation. We teach, defend, and empower children and adults by giving them the tools they need to navigate the complex immigration system. We do this in 2 ways, through our representation program and our community education program. Community education in particular has always been really important for Esperanza because it's really where we started. Representation departments have grown more recently in immigration, and so really at the heart of what we've done through the years has been community education. Next slide, please. So one of our community education programs, we've got a couple that work with just varying populations. Some work with children, some work with the detained folks, and our program specifically works with unrepresented immigrants who are facing removal proceedings and they're non-detained. So we work really with the main Los Angeles courts, now that there are 3 here in Southern California, but we also do provide some support for folks that have jurisdiction in other locations. But again, the whole goal is to get adults and families in removal proceedings, provide them with important information and self-help services, and support them as they navigate the system. And we do that through consultations, orientations, our workshops, pro bono placements, and then as well as application and motion preparation. Next slide, please. So pre-COVID, our structure was as follows. We would start similar to what NSC does with consultations. The goal of those consultations is to provide information one-on-one with our participants, as well as sort of triage and determine what ways our program can assist them, whether it's through workshops or through follow-up appointments or motion preparation. We would have walk-in hours about 3 days a week, where folks can come in at any time and get appointments and see someone and talk with someone one-on-one. During these consultations, folks would also get orientations about the process as they're sort of waiting to be seen one-on-one. For those that are applying for asylum, we would then invite them to what we call Asylum 1. It's a presentation where we go over the elements of asylum, withholding of removal, and the Convention Against Torture. After this, or during the presentation, our participants are also provided resources as well as the Spanish application I-589, and these would occur about twice a month. And then if they attended Asylum 1, with some exceptions, they were then placed on a wait list very similar to what Linda was explaining. And our wait list has also gotten pretty excessive through the years. And who we determined would get invited to Asylum 2, which I'll explain in a second, is just based on sort of priorities of who needs to get these applications done sooner rather than later. The Asylum 2 workshop was now a much smaller workshop where the actual I-589 preparation takes place. We divided it into what we refer to as Part A and Part B. Part A is all the biographical information of the I-589 for those who are familiar with it, which is usually about page 1 through 4. And then Part B goes into more of the substantive questions that the I-589 goes into. And we also provide them guidance on submitting the biometrics packet so that they get their appointment for fingerprinting. Participants also are provided with information about how to file everything properly with the court. Like I said, who gets invited to this much smaller workshop, which is usually about 8 to 10 folks, is the priority is to 1-year deadlines. And more recently, in the years of the program, also immigration judge deadlines, which have become kind of a bigger deadline for the population we serve. And these, when pre-COVID, these were happening about 3 to 4 times a month. Next slide, please. Post-COVID, like Linda explained, it sort of really changed a lot of what we were doing. We really were heavily dependent on having group events, and so COVID made that impossible to do. We now do everything via phone and all the various technologies that Linda also mentioned, like Zoom and some other things. We still try to keep somewhat of a similar structure, but it has changed. We do start with consultations to do that same sort of triaging assessments, and we have call-in days. People can call and get the thing, get an appointment to do a one-on-one consultation, as well as just get information generally, and get invitations for these various workshops. Asylum 1 has remained this presentation of the elements of asylum, as well as the other forms of relief. Respondents are still provided with the resources that we would give them, would have given them in person, but now we're sending them via email or WhatsApp, depending on sort of what's the best communication for them. These are happening twice a month, and we're doing them via Zoom. Asylum 2 changed. We now use this as a way to walk people through our asylum, the Spanish asylum application. Pre-COVID, the preparation of the asylum application was really critical. Respondents were told that they had to prepare that in advance of being invited to the much smaller Asylum 2 workshop. It helped them start looking at the application, gathering the important information that they needed, and so they came more prepared for the event, which made the workshop itself a little bit faster to go through. So in this setting, and when we did it in person, the Spanish application is still kind of complex. If you're reading it, it still may not completely always make sense. And we saw that when we were doing it in person. So what we did is our Asylum 2 became a day where one of our staff members walked folks through the application, answered any questions that they would have, so that they would prepare that Spanish application as well as possible, and then they would send it to us, a copy or like a photocopy, whether it was through WhatsApp, a text, or anything like that, so that we can start gathering that information and preparing the English packet that they would be submitting to the court. These again happen via Zoom and happen twice a month. Now, the actual preparation of the application has changed for us significantly. We now we still look at what are priority dates, and then we assign them to volunteers as well as to an attorney that supervises that particular volunteer. They are then, it is then the volunteer's responsibility to get in contact with our participant and figure out when's the best time to sort of coordinate a call or multiple calls to confirm the information that they provided through the Spanish application, as well as to walk them through the remaining parts of the application, and answer questions that they might have, and create the final version of the English packet. Then our attorneys, or the volunteer attorneys as well as staff attorneys, go over those applications similar to what Linda was explaining. And then there's kind of a back and forth of just explaining things of the application before a final version is prepared, which is then sent over to our participants via email or WhatsApp. Next slide, please. So the roles, pre-COVID, our Esperanza staff really handled most of the consultations, with some exceptions when we had legal interns. We do run the Asylum 1 presentation, and we also have our own team members also participated in the supervision of volunteers for Asylum 2, as well as the actual preparation of Part B, the more substantive section of the application of the I-589. General volunteers, which would be anyone who's sort of non-legal based, is what we refer to. Pre-COVID would help with during the Asylum 2 applications, with the Part A, so the biographical information, where they felt a little bit more comfortable when they're new to immigration law. They would also sometimes help with interpreting when we had some kind of special events or larger clinics where we had folks that didn't speak Spanish, since the majority of the population speaks Spanish. They would also help with interpreting in those events. Then we've got law student volunteers and attorney volunteers. They would help. Their focus would be the second half of the I-589, the Part B, which again, the more substantive aspect of the application. Post-COVID, our Esperanza staff still continue to do the consultations, the presentations, as well as the preparation and the supervision. Our general volunteers now potentially do full preparation of the applications depending on their experience level. We've had a lot of interest from paralegals who work at firms and have been preparing I-589s in the past, and so they're very well prepared to sort of handle the full application. Law students also help with the full preparation. And now we have something new for us. We've got more attorney volunteers that have experience in asylum and are now volunteering to supervise our folks. So very similar to Tennessee. While our volunteers do the actual preparation, now these really great attorneys that work at different nonprofits here in Southern California are now offering to supervise all the work that they're doing in the remote setting that we're in. Next slide, please. And that's it on my end.
Great. Thank you very much, Evelyn. I think both of the presentations really helped ground us in terms of getting a sense of the nuts and bolts of how your clinics operate. And the thing that strikes me, and I imagine many of us out there, is how flexible and resilient you've had to be, and how much you keep iterating based on the ever-moving conditions. And so just want to recognize that it's no small feat to go from a completely in-person setup to transform that work into a remote sense and still be able to meet people where they are. So just want to recognize that and thank you for that work. And on that, I guess a question that I think a lot of us are thinking about is, obviously the pandemic has brought a lot of challenge into the work that we do, especially when we're thinking about the power of being in the room together, the power of building community. What are some things, though, that you think you'd want to sorry for the phone background. What are some elements of this transition into a remote space that you think are viable when we return to a quote unquote normal space? Are there things that you think really do deserve to stay on? And what have been, if you could choose the one challenge of this, what would you say it's been for your work? And, Linda, if you want to start, and then Evelyn, please.
Sure. So oops, my dog. So one of the unexpected benefits of the COVID environment for us was that we were able to get a real handle on our volunteers, more than anything else, honestly, because the structure of being on Zoom and having to register in advance and having to sign up, all of that was something that we had really been working toward, getting our volunteers to sign up in advance, so that we could, so we knew what we could do on a given night at clinic, because of, as I said earlier, because we had grown so organically and so precipitously, it just became, if you walked in at the beginning of clinic, it was utter chaos. So in that respect, this structure has really, just helped organize us and, and just be more efficient, honestly. We get started right away, by 6:15, everyone is in a breakout room starting to work, and they have a good 2.5 hours in which to do their work. So, so that's I would say that's the benefit. Another benefit is that friends don't have to travel. It's expensive to commute on the subway, and there are perils on the subway. There's so many times when we begged folks not to jump the turnstile, but these are the things that happen when you are very, very limited resources. So yeah, so those two things, and friends have said that as well. But definitely a challenge is that we're not all in the same room. I mean, it was chaotic, but it was also beautiful to be in that space, to just and see the kids running around, and the church provided food, and I mean, it was just some folks would just come to eat and hang out, and they had already finished their work. So it became a real community builder and a place, a real sanctuary, honestly, for those hours, a place where you weren't judged and you were welcomed, and you were accepted just as you are. So so we definitely missed that part of it.
And just a quick follow-up, Linda, and then Evelyn, over to you. Of the two that you mentioned in terms of the remote training and the lawyer sign up and the travel piece, how do you see that staying on? Do you envision having an in-person clinic again when the pandemic hopefully is behind us? And what do you see staying with you from the learnings of this period?
Well, I think, yes, we definitely envision, again, we don't know when it's going to be, because again, like a gathering like ours will be the very last thing to get approved. Us and Broadway, right? So, yeah, so, but what we developed in terms of, and really what our volunteer coordinator developed in terms of the system of signing up and RSVPing and making your commitment and following through, that definitely is a piece that will stay. And I think that in some form, we will continue to have an opportunity for remote work because, you know, as they say, like it was lots of friends really liked it, and volunteers as well. So, you know, it's really nice to know, right, that this kind of an option exists, and that we've also been able to expand and start helping folks from all over the country. So that is definitely something that we will continue.
Great. Yeah, Evelyn, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges and the positives of this remote is that we've experienced are very similar to what Linda was explaining. I think, I mean, we did have a lot of structure in our in-person setting, and so to shift that all around was, I think, hard a little bit. Like it took us a little bit of time, and I think we're still trying to figure out how to best help folks in this remote world. We're constantly changing the structure a little bit, figuring it out, and so we're learning as we're going along. I think one of the things that has been really positive about it is we've allowed for more flexibility. Before, obviously, everything got done in one afternoon, which was good in many ways. But I think what I realized, and I think we knew this all along, was that there was kind of a lack of connection that was happening because you were just, you know, aggressively finishing an application in an afternoon that requires a lot of, you know, private and sensitive information. And that part was always really difficult for us. And in the remote setting, you know, our volunteers are having, you know, multiple calls with folks. And so they're taking, depending on sort of important deadlines in the application, they really are working at the pace of the participant that has to disclose all this information. And I think that's been really great. I think it's allowed the respondents not to feel like they're being rushed through what is a really important application, as well as allowing our volunteers to really connect with those that they're helping. And that's been really great. So we have check-ins with our volunteers, and they let us know, like, yeah, they're sharing recipes with each other and things like that. And so that was really good, because I think one thing that we were trying to do before COVID hit was try to do and mirror some of the things that Linda and NSC were doing, and sort of creating more of a community, because we did have this audience, and we wanted to better connect with them and have them connect with each other. And we were, you know, that has been the hard part about going into the remote world, is that we don't have that as much, and it is a little bit harder to coordinate folks when you're not physically present all with everyone in one space, because people are doing it at their own time and their own availability. But I was happy to see that we were sort of able to still create connectivity between the volunteers and the participants, because it is a difficult application, and we knew that then, and so we're glad that we're creating a more comfortable space for them to sort of be able to talk about those things. I think, like Linda was saying, we definitely see retaining some of these tools. I mean, we've created a big infrastructure for remote services at this point, and we don't want to just let that go to the wayside. I think it's going to be a question of using it for the population that it needs it, whether it's someone who has to travel far and it's impossible for them to get rides to come to our LA office, right? I know that's been hard for many people through the years, or people who, you know, don't have a really aggressive deadline, but, you know, are hoping to get help soon, and the likelihood of them getting representation is really, really low. Then they can slowly work with a volunteer, because I think it's been great getting volunteers who also were really busy and couldn't come on a specific day to work with us, right? They could do things on the weekend, because we never really had weekend events. They could work with the respondents on weekends when they're available and the volunteers available, which is great. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of really great aspects of it, and we've got to figure out, when things go back to whatever normal is, how to use these really great tools for the population that really, really needs it.
Thank you both. I think it's a little bit of light that, you know, that we can hear from what you're saying, is that this is just another way to reach people, another way to provide access, another door for folks to walk in. And so that's something that we want to continue to build upon, wherever we may find ourselves in the coming months. So Thank you for that. On the point of kind of having open doors to kind of let us all in, I think, as I mentioned in the early part of today's webinar, legal empowerment is really about this idea of opening up, democratizing law, democratizing legal systems, kind of dismantling in some ways the way we traditionally think about the lawyer and the client, and kind of complicating, because it's all very complicated. And getting more of us involved in this justice struggle. And so Justice Power really tries to do that and honor that within some of the work that's happening here in the US within the immigration space. In order to do that, you both mentioned a bit around the different roles that volunteers play, that friends will play in the work. And so would just love to hear a little more about that kind of training. Like, what are the types of trainings that you're thinking about for the different folks that are involved? And how do you sustain? Like, what are some tactics or strategies you can share with the world out there about how you keep people engaged as the climate continues to get so incredibly challenging? Maybe Evelyn, you want to start on this one? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I think for us, you know, we really love the legal empowerment model because we're at, you know, depending on the population, all of those mean a lot to us. But I think, you know, information is power. And so starting from that first step with both our volunteers as well as our participants that we work with, making them, however complex immigration law is, which it is, giving them that information is really critical. And that's kind of, at least with regards to the participants, that's why we had created Asylum 1, was because we felt like we didn't want to just throw them an application and provide no context of what they were doing, what it is that they were applying for. And so although the respondents weren't always fans of this because it was an additional event, we'd still have about 40 to 50 people attend, and walking them through you know, the immigration law and procedure, and through what is asylum, what is expected of them, and giving them that framework so that they kind of going into preparing their application. Because like Linda was explaining earlier, you know, at the end of the day, they're the ones in the driver's seat as to what goes on in their applications and their motions and their cases. We're here to provide the information that they need to make those choices. And we try our best to remind folks of that, because they obviously turn to us to kind of get the answer for them. And we obviously can't do that, but we also remind them the power of them being able to make the choices for themselves and their families, because we're not the ones going to be impacted by those decisions. And so having that presentation, giving them the space to learn, but also to ask questions as a community, questions that, you know, the person sitting next to them might have, is really, really important for us. And we found that the more information that they have, the more empowered they feel to sort of make decisions in their cases, be vocal about it in court, and that's really critical. For volunteers, we work in a really similar way. We do have pretty extensive training for any type of volunteer or intern or attorney that works with our program, depending on what role they're in, of course. But we also always want to give them a framework, just like what we do with our participants, of what it is that they're getting themselves into as to immigration law, asylum law, because they also come with very little experience or knowledge in it. So we want them to see what role they play and sort of how it impacts the entire structure of like asylum and immigration law. With our volunteers, we also, as an organization, as you know, in this administration, we've seen so many changes that directly impact the work that we are doing with our participants. And so because we gave them a framework when these changes come about, we send them out to our volunteer network and say, hey, this is how your work is being impacted by the changes. These are opportunities to make comments, you know, make your voices heard about your experiences as volunteers, and whether it's with our organization or other organizations, and sort of make them aware so they have more of a foundation of knowledge, but as well as now connecting to how they can hopefully help shape and change a little bit, make their voices heard, and beyond just, you know, because I think for a long time it was just really the organizations sending comments and doing these things. We now have more players in the community that see how these things impact them and the folks that they've been helping. and that's been great. I think what we want to figure out too internally is how do we then get our participants to also now go into that stage of things, the shaping and the forming. I think that's definitely something we're interested in sort of combating and figure out how we can do that within our program.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. Linda, do you want to add a bit on this?
Sure. I mean, we, I echo Evelyn on the trainings. The Zoom has actually, helped with that because we've been able to do shorter trainings, longer trainings. Everyone is getting much more used to technology. And so we, to our weekly email, we add a little, clip, a tidbit to teach the volunteers something that they, have a question about. We're recruiting constantly. I mean, we have a, everyone knows it's a very intense activity that we're asking volunteers to engage in, and we also encourage our volunteers to tag out, so if you need to rest, you need to regroup, you need to please take care of yourself, and then come back in. So we really need such a large pool of volunteers that are ready and willing. We like to through our newsletter, we have a monthly newsletter where we share, the work of the clinic, what are victories, just so people feel like I'm a part of something that's yielding some goodness, and we have a weekly community meeting that we invite all our volunteers to. It's a space, again, on Zoom, where folks can just, hang out, and, nothing, terribly serious is going on, another way to engage with affected community members and build relationships. And then, we have these, other opportunities for activism. I think one of the benefits of our organization is that we have these other programs, and, so for different campaigns, we try and involve, all of our members in whatever it is that that we're doing. If we're doing comments, we have trainings on how to do comments. If we're supporting a particular individual friend at a check-in with a rally, whatever, we invite everybody to come and do that. We have a weekly Jericho walk on Thursday mornings, now on Zoom, where we invite folks to just be together in sort of moments of calm and intentionality, to join together in one voice, putting out there to the universe what it is we want, what kind of a new world we want to create.
Thank you, Linda. I was just looking at some of the questions that are coming through. And so I think it's really exciting to hear from both of you how volunteers and friends or folks who are impacted get a chance and access to understanding frameworks and rights and systems, as well as thinking about how to eventually plug in to transform those systems. So there's a lot of, I think, interest to learn a little more of that. There is a question, it seems like a lot of folks are interested in the more technical aspect of Zoom. So it's not necessarily that maybe the most, it is inspiring, but like what does it feel like to use Zoom? Are there other platforms you looked at? You mentioned that you have phone calls, Evelyn, when you're dealing with tech literacy. Like, what are ways in which you've been thinking through the actual technology tool that you're so heavily reliant on these days?
Yeah, so I'll start. We went to Zoom because we went to our tech person, who is obsessed with security and all of those things, and she investigated, and we needed a large enough platform that could provide enough breakout spaces, and that was really how we ended up with Zoom. And what happens is, folks register in advance and they get assigned to breakout rooms, and now Zoom has this choice where you can assign, move yourself to your own breakout room, which is even better. And so every room is is labeled with an ID number and the friend's first name, and you go to that space. And one of the actually really cool things to see is when everyone logs on and there are announcements and maybe a little bit of a training on how to use this or that tech piece, and then the breakout rooms are opened, and then you just see all of the faces popping off, everybody going into their own space. And we first conquered that piece of it with volunteers, and then we started onboarding friends, because so many have smartphones, and we were able to to get them to download Zoom and that kind of thing. But we also use WhatsApp video if they don't feel comfortable with the other technology. And so we'll have the team members in the breakout room, and the interpreter has the friend on their phone on WhatsApp, and remarkably works. You can even see their face on the phone. So yeah, so that's basically how that works. We also, though, realized that we needed to be able to communicate, teams to coordinators to leaders to different folks like that, and so that's where Keybase comes in, and that's the encrypted end-to-end messaging application that allowed us to to pin certain documents and things like that that were helpful. It also, I didn't mention before, but one of the things that was huge for us was that we were already completely digital in terms of our friends' information. Each friend had a profile on our database. We have a database that was built from scratch by our tech folks, and everything was digitized. So it was actually a blessing. We got kicked out of the space that we were using, which was close to our office. We used to walk with hundreds of files from one place to another, and then when that wasn't feasible, we went totally digital. That was in October. So we were in a good position for that.
Great. Evelyn, do you have anything you want to add on to that, or I can go on to another question unless there's something specific beyond what Linda has shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will say we haven't conquered what you guys have been able to do in having like a mass Zoom event where you're doing massive, just doing tons of breakout groups. We haven't been able to do that, and so we have sort of more focused it on one-on-one scheduling phone appointments or video if that's what both sides are comfortable with. But we haven't done what NSC has done, which is really great. We are a little nervous about the technology. Our respondents, we do our presentations via Zoom, and we do see a lot of participants struggle with getting on. And there have been really great videos that have been created to walk folks through how to get Zoom and all that, which has been really helpful. And I think out here, at least, I believe a lot of the school districts use Zoom, so that's great too, because that means that they've already been using it for their kids. So the tech side of it definitely is hard. I think for us, however tech savvy we were before, we're now using tons of programs to stay connected with the team as well as to our participants. And so it is a lot, I would say, to sort of you're kind of keeping an eye on to stay together in communication. So there's definitely challenges there.
There's been a couple questions to you both, in addition to just like how do you does Zoom work, and how do you build community when you're also dealing with such traumatic issues? And so I think you both talked through a little bit about how repetition, kind of being there, it's not just a 1 hour session. I think that seems to be a way in which both of your organizations are thinking through that. The other question that's come up is, because you are now remote, Linda, you mentioned this briefly, but just there's some interest in, like, are you open to folks in other states now? There's questions here about, would you be able to partner and work with people in places outside of Los Angeles, in New York? And if so, how would someone reach you? Like, how does that work?
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Evelyn, go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay. So we have a referral form. It's, that we can make available. I guess somehow Sukti, we can get it to folks, but we
Yeah.
are definitely working. It started off because we have an anti-detention program as well, where folks who are in jail, we work with them, and then when they get bonded out, if they don't find an attorney, but they might go to different parts of the country. That's really how it started. But like I said, Zoom made it possible, so it doesn't matter where you are, right? We can and we can file, via mail, just about anywhere, right? So so those two things make it easy to do that.
Yeah, same too. Similar to Linda, there's a form. I think we've kept the same structure that Esperanza in general had before. We would have events, volunteer events, where we walk them through what the program, our organization, and what ways volunteers and interns sort of could play within the organization, and you would have an interview to kind of figure out where would you be best suited within the organization. So our team is still doing that just via Zoom and Google Forms, so people can still sign up and get to know the organization, see how they can make an impact, and then see if it's a good fit with us.
Okay, great. And I think when Pat comes back at the end, I think there is a way to make sure that we can share that information to the folks who are with us today on on the webinar. There was a question around timeline. So, we focused a lot on the I-589 filing, maybe the work permits and other kind of collateral things that relate to that. How much do the friends or the immigrants that you're working with stay with you in this process?
A long time, sometimes. For some of our respondents, participants, we've been with them since before their case went into court until their case was over or got appeal. And at multiple stages along the way, we've provided support where we can. That includes, motion preparation, preparation for merits hearings, as well as if they need help with notices of appeal to the BIA. So it varies. Not everybody stays with us during that entire period of time. Many then go during that one stage of the process, get representation, and they move on. We check in here and there to just double check that they have what they need, but that's it. So it just depends. But there is a small population that we've walked through the entire process with them.
Great.
Yeah, it's fairly common for us to stay connected with our community members because we have those other programs. So through the accompaniment program, they still stay connected with them. They go with them to their hearings. And then the leaders give us back a report, what happened. Like, what did the judge say? What did this, what happened?
The leaders in the accompaniment program, right?
Right. The leaders in the accompaniment program. Yeah. So so we continue to stay involved as much as they want us to. Sometimes, they find an attorney and they're like, I'm good, so so that's fine too. But we also have, a few who have gone on to be granted asylum, come back as volunteers, and currently 2 of our staff members are former community members who had been in the immigration system.
Yeah, that's great. That goes back to the question earlier around kind of what role can folks play, not only as, you know, taking ownership of your case, but also coming back and playing a much more frontline role in this justice ecosystem. There was a question out there around, could this type of pro se legal clinic in either fashion, I mean, there's a lot of similarities also between the two of you, could it be adjusted for a smaller organization? Like, what are the kind of core resources from like a human perspective to other resources that would be necessary to kind of get this going? Because it seems like there's interest to try to replicate, but like how big do you need to be? How small can you be to really try to get this off the ground?
So I think for both of us, I think we started out pretty small. I mean, our program, you know, Esperanza is larger, but within the program that works with unrepresented immigrants, we've been a staff of most of the time, well, full-time staff of 2, maybe 2 to 2.5, maybe. Thankfully, like Esperanza as a whole has been supportive, and staff members throughout the organization through the years have provided some support, but we rely heavily on our volunteers and our interns. So if feasible, if you can create enough outreach to the community, whether through the law schools, to then in general to the community in general, to get people interested in volunteering and doing this. Like Linda was explaining, it is a little bit intense, at least with the I-589, it is intense what you're doing, and volunteers that, you know, don't necessarily have a background in immigration do sometimes feel really nervous about kind of taking on this type of role. So having that support, the training, and the supervision, I think makes them feel more comfortable with taking this on. And then as with NSC, New Sanctuary Coalition, we do have a lot of volunteers that come back, and they're they feel confident enough to keep doing it. And so I think once you create a good volunteer base, a smaller organization can do it. And I think what's great, and obviously for us, we're more than happy to share what we've created along the way, the infrastructure to do that. I think here locally, there really wasn't any other collaboratives or other folks that were sort of doing the I-589, and slowly we're seeing more interest in that. So we are supporting them by providing them and showing them the infrastructure we created, so that they're not rewriting everything, redoing it all, obviously tweaking it to what they think is best for their organization, but you're not starting from scratch. I think that was hard for us, was starting from scratch and thinking through what was the best way to structure these based on the population that you serve. I think that's another thing that sort of take into consideration, is just geographically, where's your population, right? Or the demographics of the population that you serve, languages and all that. But I think there are a lot of great resources now that can get you started without, and I think that's really important, because then you can sort of focus on just getting the other folks you need, volunteers, interns, everyone you need to sort of really give you the manpower to sort of actually do the workshops in the clinic.
Great, and I would just do one more kind of shameless plug, that the Justice Power website is meant to be a space where folks can go and see the beginnings of what these strategies look like. And our hope is that folks out there can start thinking about how could they bring in some of these methods into their work. And so just wanted to put that there. Linda, did you want to add anything to what Evelyn has said in terms of kind of resources, or small versus large? Or do you think, Evelyn, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Not a whole lot, other than just to say, we began as, a group of very few volunteers who were working with, very few friends, and then it grew organically. And so I think that in fact, probably best thing to do is start small and work your way up.
Great. There's a question that recognizes that both of your organizations have been running these clinics for some time, and so they're curious how you've handled the constraints of this particular administration even prior to COVID. So things like immigration court quotas, narrowing asylum definitions, rejection of I-589s, like how has all of that affected the work that you do?
I mean, there's, been an enormous effect. It affected the work because it brought a lot of volunteers to New Sanctuary, myself included primarily. And then, you know, as it became more and more, you know, draconian, honestly, we relied on our activist attorneys to come up with different strategies, you know, and you know, our executive director has always said to us, you know, we aren't the judge, right? You don't know what the judge is going to do. You have no idea. And you know, our role is to, you know, as we've said so many times, provide the information, provide the tools, you know, work as a team to, you know, to just produce, you know, do the best that we can do. And then honestly, it's, you know, it's out of our hands. You know, we have to tell our volunteers and, you know, ourselves over and over again, like, we did not create this, right? We did not create this problem. But we're not going to walk away from it either. You know, we're there, and that has to mean something, I hope.
It does. Evelyn, do you have anything that you want to add on that?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's been incredibly challenging. I think the pro se population in particular is very vulnerable to exactly what it is that they're doing. And so when you're working, you're really the only person that pro se population has to go to. You do feel a lot of responsibility to keep them totally informed of the changes that are happening on a weekly basis that are directly impacting them, as well as now trying to meet aggressive deadlines, right? Before, early on in the administration at least, you know, our biggest deadline was the 1-year deadline for the asylum application. And although it was, you know, difficult, but, you know, we were generally able to keep that up. I think towards the end, that's where you started to see the quotas really hitting, and that would mean that now we were seeing a lot of immigration judge deadlines a lot sooner than we would have seen before. And so, you know, pre-COVID, we were starting to try to strategize, like, how are we going to take this on? I mean, part of that strategy was reaching out to our colleagues in the community and saying, hey, this is a problem. Folks are going to get removed if they don't have these applications set. So we need more folks to sort of, it can't be just us. And so slowly we started to see more organizations wanting to collaborate, more people. So to sort of address these things. So it's been difficult. It's been hard to keep up with all the legal changes and then providing that information to our participants and in a way that they can understand and see how it impacts them, as well as constantly retraining our volunteers who were used to a first set of rules and now different along the way. So it's definitely been hard. We were still trying to figure it out, and surprisingly, COVID has given us like a moment to sort of step back and sort of say, like, okay, regroup and figure out how do we address some of these challenges, because with the hearings ending, a lot of these like major deadlines that we were so worried about sort of kind of stopped for a moment, although they're restarting out here in LA, to sort of think through how do we do this, how do we get more folks to be able to help this population so that we really do get them the assistance that they need in this critical time.
I love Linda was actively shaking her head with the idea that you have had some time to regroup. There's been a question around like, how do you measure that you're like what impacts you're bringing, you know? And I would ask that we don't think about it. We complicate what impact means, not just in the way in which maybe donors or others define it, but like, how do you know that your work is moving forward, is successful? And one more point I want to add before we get to that question is when you mentioned the translation of law piece to make sure people kind of understanding the systems, Evelyn, I think that's the part that is really essential when thinking about legal empowerment work. Is it's not just the language justice component of like translating verbatim, but like, how do you actually translate this legalese into a language that folks can access? And so thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, the large question around like impact or success, what do you see? How do you see it in your organizations?
I think one big thing for us, you know, when the program began, what we were seeing all the time were people missing that 1 year deadline constantly. Nobody was aware of that. No one had the assistance early. Sometimes, I mean, most didn't have the assistance early on in their cases to prepare that. And although most judges, I think, were understanding, not all. So I think our goal was to help as many people get those applications in within the 1 year deadline to avoid the complications that exist if you're submitting it after. I think that, and so that was kind of one of the big things that we felt we were making an impact on, and we have, I feel, in making sure and prioritizing that those folks get assisted right away. We've made sure that a lot of them didn't submit it late, and that's been really important to us. I think the other thing is, and this doesn't happen all the time, but it's just witnessing a respondent connect the law to their cases. That's always been amazing to see them make that analysis that sort of anybody or an attorney, I guess, would do on their own. Just kind of connecting them means to us that we're presenting it in a way that they're understanding, and they can now see how it impacts their case. And then they become an active member of, and really leading the conversation of what information they need to make the best decisions and how to best prepare for the case. And we don't see that in every case, and we recognize that's going to be difficult because of how hard it is to communicate these really complex concepts to just about anybody. But I think once you have those connections with some, I think that's a big win for us, because that means that in that moment they've been empowered with exactly what we hope to do with the information, and they can see how it's impacting their lives.
Yeah. Linda?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very challenging part of our work, right? Because the capitalist system views victories as cases won, and we have come to view victories as time gained, right? The more time we help you get, the better. So like what Evelyn's saying, meeting the year deadline, huge, right? Doing that change of venue, huge. Getting our folks to their hearings, huge. And even in the worst of situations, standing there and being a witness, not turning away from the horrors that our government is, acting upon all of our friends. At the end of the day, I guess we just hope that like I said before, that means something, and that people are transformed somehow, some way.
Thank you, Linda. Apologies for that phone in the background. I think time gained is a really powerful statement. There is someone in the chat who wanted to shout out a moment, Linda, where you described, and I think this goes to the question of impact, where a friend has just wanted to shout out the moment where a friend has just received legal counsel from a volunteer attorney and then has the opportunity to self-determine their next steps while surrounded by non-lawyer friends and sometimes family to support them. That moment is something that many clients who have retained counsel in more traditional ways do not experience. And so I think that idea of like a family, a community, a network that these pro se legal clinics, foster is just such an incredible aspect of the work that, both of your organizations do. So there's been, as both of you know, a proposed reg out there that may implicate the work of pro se legal clinics. I think the title I have is Professional Conduct for Practitioners, Rules and Procedures, and Representation and Appearances. Before going into kind of the more legal, aspects of it, just would love to get your thoughts. If you could talk through how you read that proposed reg and how you think it might implicate the work that you do, since you do have quote unquote practitioners, folks who are doing more of the legal advice and legal work, and then you have the preparers. And so how are you thinking about this regulation, and do you see it impacting your work in any way?
I can start. I think what's difficult about what the proposed regulation from what we're seeing is sort of language that's been added to expand what practice is, in particular, the term of legal judgment. I mean, we think I've always known, you know, advice is something that you can't do unless you are an attorney or one of the many listed sort of practitioners that are part of the regulation. Legal judgment, on the other hand, we don't know what that means exactly. And I think for our program in particular, you know, preparation plus information go hand in hand. Providing them the legal information to understand what it is that they're preparing is really, really important for us, for them to understand how to best present their case. And so we worry about what that could mean for our program as we're trying to have our participants be as informed as possible on the law that applies to them and their cases, whether this really will prevent them from getting the important information that they need to make specific decisions in their cases. So we are nervous. I think, you know, our volunteer base has been both non-legal as well as legal, which would fall under the more practitioner realm. And I think we worry for those attorneys and those legal interns that really do want to participate in our clinics, because even within the proposed reg, there's a footnote that says they see it on a very rare occasion that someone in that position would actually be a preparer, right? Based on sort of the way that they are defining things. So that worries us. That worries that we could see a major chilling effect at both ends of the spectrum, from the legal volunteers to the non-legal, worried about sort of where does that line exist, right? Because if you're not a practitioner, you can't use legal judgment in any way. So would our volunteers that are non-legal be worried about the information that they're providing to folks? Does that somehow run into that blurry line? You know, it's hard to know at this stage exactly what they mean by those terms, and so we do worry with regards to how that would impact our volunteer network, since we're so heavily dependent on those folks.
One other question, Linda, unless you want to add on to this point, obviously would love to hear your thoughts, or we can move on to another question.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I would add is that, you know, as I was talking to Evelyn earlier, our volunteer attorneys are divided on what they think it means. And so for right now, we're just trying to get as much information as we can to see, you know, how we're going to adjust. I mean, you know, we know for sure that this is not, you know, anything that comes out of the DOJ right now is not meant to help us. So I guess we're going to stay tuned and see how we can adjust and, you know, and continue to do our work.
I guess in the few minutes we have left, I was just running through the questions, and I think this is a really important one. I mean, all of them are, but this one relates to, you know, you both prioritize the fact that those who are coming up on their deadlines end up, you know, getting priority in part because of the deadline itself. Now, what if you have, you know, 10 people who have upcoming deadlines and you don't have the bandwidth to necessarily help all of them? What are additional factors that come into consideration to kind of prioritize and say, okay, we'll be able to help the 3 of you as opposed to all 10 of you? Like, are there any other factors that come into play when making those kind of decisions?
Yeah, so I will say that the person, when it comes down to it, it's about the friend, you know, is how actively involved is the friend in their own case, and are you calling me every day to ask me to do work on your case? You know, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the person who really is the most motivated, is going to be the best, advocate for themselves, right? We are really fortunate that we have not found ourselves in that position. We've never had to turn anyone away. Even if you come to us the night before, we'll get something prepared with you that you can give to a judge, and with a letter that says, please, I just found them last night, give me more time. And it's always worked. So, like I say, we're lucky.
We do have, at our end, I think we do have some more limitations because our workshops are smaller. But so, like what Linda was explaining, one of the big factors that we consider is how motivated the respondent is to sort of get the work done in their case. So sometimes we'll have a running, like a special other wait list of folks that are constantly talking to us. So we know that we're making sure that we're flagging them as somebody who's been reaching out, who's very active. I think taking other things into consideration, just like the distance someone is traveling, how long have they been on our wait list and been waiting for us, right? Just things like that. But we do, in our program, there's always one person that's sort of responsible for that. And I leave it to them to decide as they run through the list and they know the participants that are on it. I let them make that judgment call. And then we provide the person we can't with resources, things that they might need to try to find somebody that could try to help them create something. And if they don't, they can remain on our list. And we mention in their explanation as to why they couldn't do it in time. We explained that they tried to get help from programs like ours. And we just didn't have the capacity to sort of help them as quickly as we could. And hopefully that's something that the judges are taking into consideration as they've become familiar through the years with our program.
Great. I see that we are coming up on time. There are a number of questions out there. So thank you all for sharing so many really important questions. And as we mentioned, we can share some resources. Linda, you mentioned a referral link. We can also, Evelyn, perhaps your contact information, and as folks think about potentially designing something similar, and appreciate Evelyn also noting that geography matters. And so obviously we can't cut and copy these clinics, but there's a lot that we could learn from just the structures that both organizations have built. And there was one other point, that someone who was formerly detained, who's released, also wants to start plugging in from a volunteer perspective. So it's not just, so really exciting to see that. And I think both organizations have spaces to offer you that kind of support and engagement. So thank you both. Pat, I'm gonna pass it back to you, but thank you so much, Evelyn and Linda, for spending time with us. Your incredible insights today, really just so valuable. And thank you, Pat, for the partnership. Over to you.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you to the New Sanctuary Coalition and to Esperanza Immigrant Rights Projects and to the Justice Power Project for your time and your expertise today. For folks in the audience, we'll be posting a recorded version of today's webinar in the week ahead. Check back on www.immigrationadvocates.org, and we'll include whatever handouts or link information that the panelists would like to add. With that, I invite you to join the Immigration Advocates Network if you haven't already. Membership is free to nonprofit staff and pro bono lawyers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.